think all of us are confusing Trump for a sickness. It's a symptom, not a disease. Okay, Trump is a symptom of the disease that is in our country. Now, I think it's Yoruba people that say that it doesn't matter if a snake is dead, whether a woman kill him or whether Abi, the snake is dead. So whether it is Trump or whoever that has given us this jab, it is time for Nigeria to wake up. Let me say something. I don't know whether they remember. You're going to be told later about how President Jonathan became a president. There is an incident. Many of you remember the National Peace Committee that I convened in 2015 when there was an apocalyptic diagnosis that Nigeria was going to collapse. And the tension that existed at that moment, something happened. And it was about getting President Jonathan and General Buhari to sign a commitment to free, fair, and credible elections in Nigeria. We fixed the appointment. President Jonathan gave us the time. We went. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, it happened to be now President Tinubu's birthday in Lagos, and Buhari and everybody had to come for that birthday. Now, just at the end, it was just towards, there was only 1 or 2 days more to elections. And we needed to get both of them in one room. And it proved almost literally impossible. President Jonathan was going to go to, what's the state? Delta State. And his schedule had already been concluded. Then, of course, at about midnight, General Buhari came back, and I woke up in the morning only to be told that President Buhari was available and would come for the signing of the peace accord. President Jonathan was going to be in Warri or Asaba at 9. They were supposed to depart at 9. I think this story is very important because then I now said we had written a text of the agreement. President Buhari had read the text of the agreement and said he was happy with it. Now, unfortunately for me, we didn't know how to reach President Jonathan, and I didn't know how he would come and sign an agreement he had not read. Luckily for us, the day we went to see him in the villa, as I was leaving, I saw one young man who came to me and said, oh, Bishop, I like you. I've always wanted to meet you. People say I look like you. I said, okay, that's good enough. And I think we exchanged number. He was anxious to get my number. I gave him my number. So when we gathered at Sheraton, I now called him. I said, please, is there any way? I called him at 7 o'clock in the morning. Can I read the president? He said, it's not possible. You can't get the president at 7 o'clock in the morning. 8 o'clock, all of a sudden, finally, he told me the president was having breakfast. And I said, okay, I called Dr. Abati. I said, where are you? He said, I'm in the villa. I said, do you have your iPad? He said, yes. I said, I'm going to send you a draft copy of the agreement. Can you go and see the president and read it out to him? He said, the president is having breakfast. And yet, he was able to go, read this text, and came back to us to say the president was happy with the text. It just tells you the kind of things that can happen when people who work with you gel. And I think that's why, as I said, among many other things, I thought I should be here for this event. Now Nigeria is between what I call AT and BT, or BT and AT. You know what that means? That is, right now, everything that happens in Nigeria has to be before Trump or after Trump. So, everything in between now is just details. So we are now, the title of my keynote is Nigeria, Time to Reload. Because despite the accomplishment of Dr. Abati, when I checked the records, I discovered that actually people like him and a lot of other people in the media, somehow, and please don't get me wrong, the standards are falling, not due to lack of intellect, but due to age. Because Dr. Abati's employer today, the debonair Duke, who is sitting here, started a newspaper at the age of 24. I remember with my friend, Sonola Olumese, as the editor. Chris Okole started fantastic, one of the most memorable magazines. Started at the age of 26. Peter Nahoro editing Daily Times. Matthew Mbondoka, a lot of other people and their great achievement. The challenge, therefore, is what happened, as somebody will say, on the road to heaven. And how have we ended up where we are now in Nigeria? Many of you are familiar with the poem by Robert Frost about the road not taken. It is evident that because we are taking so long to get to our destination, and because the goalposts are always constantly seemingly shifting, we must be asking ourselves, what is happening with map reading? Why have we ended up with a nation of such disrupted dreams? I look back at Nigeria. The other day I was reflecting. I said, if somebody wants to visit this country today, where will I take them to? I decided to take part of my holiday and I went to Alexandria because it's a place I've been dreaming of visiting. And I was shocked, the things I saw in Egypt. And I'm told everything is tied to, they don't have oil, but everything is literally tied to tourism. I'm asking myself, if somebody came to Nigeria today, where would they go to? Many people go to the White House, people go and see Downing Street, people go to Champs-Élysées, they go to Paris, they can see where the president lives. But even in our own country, in Nigeria, if you wanted to go, you cannot as a tourist go and see you can't go and see the presidential villa as a tourist. There's no way, unless you are hovering over a plane, you could be shot down. Other places you can go and see where president they stay, but in Nigeria you cannot see where president they stay. The point I'm making is that the absence of monuments in our country, because, and I will speak briefly in the text, over the whole question of the creation of myths as the basis for nation building. For example, the Boers who arrived South Africa in 650. One of the things they remember, and they still remember very well, is what they call the Battle of the Blood River, which is a battle in which, according to their own narration, they were able to defeat over 20,000 Zulus. Only 464 white people defeated 20,000 Zulus. Today they have what is called the Voortrekker Monument in KwaZulu-Natal. Locally, I've been to the place. The Americans have a Thanksgiving Day. And Europe celebrates Normandy Day on the 6th of June. The challenge for us is, what do we celebrate? Because almost every year, either they will tell you the celebration of Oktoberfest is low-key or is no-key at all. The point I'm making, therefore, is that somehow something happened or didn't happen. The result is that we need to reload. Why will you reload? You reload because either you fire your shot wrongly, or the object moved, or something has happened. Few people know that there were 42 attempts to kill Hitler. Somehow, people keep missing. So we need to reload because how do we explain the fact that there are over 60,000 projects that are abandoned across the length and breadth of Nigeria? How do we explain the economic hemorrhage captured in the illicit financial flows? First report that was given by Kofi Annan about 5 or 6 years ago quoted billions and billions of dollars were fleeing Africa. We ask ourselves, for example, now we are victims and hostages in the womb of ethnicity, religion, which elsewhere is a source of inspiration for us. Religion has become a subject of death. So the questions we need to ask, therefore, have to do with where did we get it wrong? Or how come even the things we did right, we didn't have the ability to consolidate on them? Here, the issues of identity, what we see, the myths around the myths of identity. Because if you ask yourself now, who are the prominent Nigerian statesmen that their names resonate across the length and breadth of Nigeria without punctuation? You will find that the Yorubas have their leader in Awolowo, the Igbos have their leader in Zik, the Northerners have their leader in Sardauna. We who are children of a lesser God have no idea. We don't know where to turn. We can only look for people who are going to adopt us. When you talk about the Americans will tell you that there are people that they call founding fathers, and they've become literally sacred monuments in the sense that their names are constantly being evoked, either to justify or to reprimand certain actions. You're talking of people like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, John Adams, John Jay, Alex Hamilton, and Thomas Jefferson. Now, we have a problem of the lack of a text in Nigeria. You cannot be an artist without a text. That's what we are in Nigeria. Because the reason why many people will wonder, and I really don't want to even go there, but why do you think Americans will feel so fanatically? It's not about going to church or not going to church. It's about the fact that the sentiments that the word Christianity evokes in them. Remember that the founding fathers called the Puritans, I mean some of the who were literally informed by the gospel of Puritanism. These early founding fathers fled from Europe. They were fleeing from the oppression, so to say, whether it's of the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church and other churches. So they had a very puritanical view of religion. And the result is that they were going to found a land. And for them, a land that was going to be based on the principles of the gospel. And that is why, as far back as 1630, a man called John Winthrop delivered a sermon which became actually the basis, more or less like the foundation for everything that America stands for in terms of how it sees itself. And it is from that speech delivered in 1630 that Winthrop spoke about. He was actually the first governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. He was an English lawyer. But in his speech, he made a point and referred to America as a city on a hill. And it is from there, because the speech contains quotations from the Prof.Mgbeke, where people are enjoined to act justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with their God. It is from that inspiration that you hear Americans talk about, in God we trust. You hear Americans talk about their manifest destiny. You hear America talking about them being God's country. And whatever problems you may have, America believes that, Professor Wolaji Akinyemi is here, so I will not go there. But Americans believe, and they've convinced themselves, that they have a mission to save the world. Whether you agree with them or not, that's not the issue. And that mission has a foundation. The question for us in Nigeria, because Americans were committed in 1776, when they issued the Declaration of Independence, we are committed to the proposition that, one, all men, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. And they are endowed by their Creator with rights that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it is to secure these rights that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So if you are messing around, and remember the First Amendment, Second Amendment, by the time you come to the Third Amendment, was the freedom of religion. So if here in Nigeria, we say, oh, you are free, you will only give you, the only we can give you freedom. To build church, we must give you permission. To build mosque, we must give you permission. The Americans place such a high premium on, first of all, freedom. So if you don't have a foundation from where you can draw a sense of what values constitute the pillars for your nation, you'll find yourself in the situation that Nigeria finds itself now. For example, the Chinese. drawing from the teachings of Confucius, which is like their Bible, the Analects, like their Bible. For example, one quotation in the Analect says, "Never impose on others what you will not choose for yourself." And they have chosen a philosophy of the mean, M-E-A-N, the mean, that is the middle, against extremes. So Chinese, the foundation of Chinese life is moderation. Now, using the pendulum as a model, they say that this teaching assumes that there should be no extremes, and there must be a deliberate effort to find an equilibrium. And a sense of virtue. Not necessarily the kind of virtue. Virtue is what makes us human. So it's not about which religion you worship. There are certain fundamental issues. So if you find us being such a chaotic, quarrelsome, angry, whatever, as we are in Nigeria, we lack a mean. We lack we lack a culture. We lack the institutional or the moral inspiration to establish kind of an equilibrium. So if we ask ourselves, who are our founding fathers? Because strange as it may sound, there are certain when you talk to the Chinese and how they see themselves. Many of us think that the Chinese are running a dictatorship. Actually, the Chinese are running a multi-party system. Because there are political parties in China other than the Communist Party. The only right that these other parties have is the right to agree with the Communist Party. So, but there are 8 parties that also posture and posture and posture. You know the story of the tortoise. They said that tortoise was, they carried tortoise. Tortoise said, "What have I?" He said, "We are taking you on exile." Tortoise said, "What have I done?" He said, "No, we are taking you on exile." He said, "Okay, please put me down." So they put tortoise down. Then tortoise scratched the ground small. And then he got up. He said, "Okay, carry me." And they said, "What have you done?" He said, "Look, this scratching of the ground that I have done, I want my people coming after me to know that I resisted, only that I was overpowered." So the Chinese allow 8 parties to pretend that they are also contesting for the election. And they do contest for elections. The challenge, in my view, is what can we say about Nigeria? Who can we say are our founding fathers? Now, there is, I'm sure there's quite a lot of literature around, and many of you are better informed than myself, and I won't go into it. But we all have a bit of familiarity with the story of how we got to be where we are today. My friend Azu is here. Just 2 weeks ago, he gave me a copy of the book called the Harold Smith Story, A Squalid End to Empire. It talks about all the shenanigans that are not in the text of what happened when the British left us this place called Nigeria. But there's also not a better book, but a very interesting book titled A Fatherless People. The author, Dele Ogun, to my greatest surprise, sent me a copy, but it talks eloquently about where things began to go wrong for us in Nigeria. And they eloquently makes the point very clearly about what the British did and how they surreptitiously kept Awolowo away, because they realized that Awolowo himself, his problem was that while in the United Kingdom as a student, he had imbibed the philosophy of Fabianism. Fabianism was the foundation of the Labour Party, and the Fabian movement in England. It's a very respectable movement, because the Fabian movement actually, they started, well, this is the problem with all these events now, that you asked me to come all the way from Sokoto, and then you asked me to speak, and then it turns out there are more important things to do. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense. So I'm going to take 10 minutes, please. But I'm going to take 10 minutes. I came all the way from Sokoto. I left work to be here. So if you wanted me to speak for 10 minutes, I would have done a video and sent to you and then said at home. Now, the Fabian Society is a very prestigious institution. They were responsible for founding what is now the London School of Economics. And I'm sure there are people here who went to LSE. They founded, Lee Kuan Yew went to LSE, Jawaharlal Nehru went to LSC. And for those of you who are in LSC, LSC has produced 50 former heads of state. It has produced 20 Nobel laureates, but they were founded by the Fabian Society. But because Harold Wilson, who was president then, was a conservative, they were naturally afraid that Awolowo might introduce the radical principles of Fabianism into Nigeria. The result was a deliberate effort to keep him away from circulation. What happened to Nnamdi Azikiwe? Azikiwe comes from the United States of America. Dele Ogun deals with these issues and speaks about the frustration that led him to end up in Ghana. Because they also didn't want Nigeria to be diluted by the radical politics of America and the movement in the United Kingdom. So if you bring all this to our situation, it means that we are acting a play we didn't write, but a play that is also full of plots that we're not prepared to deal with. So we now ask ourselves, in our own case, who do we say are our founding fathers? Many of you remember the anecdote about Nnamdi Azikiwe and Sardauna, saying, Nnamdi Azikiwe said, Sardauna, for us to be a great nation, let's forget our differences. The Sardauna said, no, let's not forget, let us remember them. The implications and the distinction between forgetting and remembering is what has brought us to where we are today. So if you find yourself moving without motion, there is a reason. In 1957, there were debates. There are all kinds of problems as to what will this country look like. The minorities in the south, we are afraid of the domination by the Igbos. The minorities in the north, we are afraid of the domination by the Hausa Fulani. But the British had given the north 3/4 of the land. And instead, in response to the Minority Commission's report, we were told, no, take this, don't worry, you Christian minorities, don't worry, the North will look after you. Looking after us for this number of years, now Trump has come knocking. So the question, this is not where we ought to be, but this is where we found ourselves. So I want to make the point that we must go back in reloading to ask ourselves, what is happening? What are we doing? What can we do differently? Now, President Jonathan is here. His foundation was rather prophetic because in September last year, he invited me to Ghana, a conference on how democracies die. Now, only about a few days ago, the Pew Foundation in America conducted a research. And the research was to find out the level of satisfaction and dissatisfaction with democracy across the whole world. And listen carefully. Their findings say that Canada, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States all registered 64% of adults saying they are dissatisfied with democracy. And only 33% said they are satisfied with democracy. Only 2 African countries were surveyed, Kenya and South Africa. Kenya registered 58% dissatisfaction and 42% satisfaction. South Africa registered 63% dissatisfaction and 33% satisfaction. Now, our dissatisfaction with democracy is interesting because India, in the findings, it is only India that registered 23% of disapproval, of dissatisfaction. That means that 77% of Indians are satisfied with democracy. And I think that one of the reasons that we can use, I don't know the reason, but 2 things is that perhaps the nature of the non-universal aspects of Asian religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and so on. Because the reason why Nigerians are having problems with Islam and Christianity is their universal claims. Now, because some of these religions are used to define people's cultural identities, they are not necessarily conflictual. So people are not. So the point is that in our own case here in Nigeria, we've had a lot of debate about what do we need to do. I think most of the scholars, everybody seems to agree that if we can get our elections right, everything in Nigeria will be okay. But I say to priests, ordination is a ceremony. It's not the priesthood. A wedding is not a marriage. It's just a ceremony. What happens after wedding is different from what happens, because it is after wedding that the real marriage starts. Because nobody could have imagined, for example, nobody could have imagined that when this beautiful historic wedding on the 29th of July, 1981, when Prince Charles married Princess Diana, was a ceremony that the world stood still for. But nobody could have imagined what happened on August 28, 1966, when the marriage crashed. The point I'm making is that I think that free, fair, and credible elections are necessary, but they are not necessary. They are not a sufficient condition for the institutionalization of the principles of democracy, precisely because there's still a lot of hard work. And on this argument, again, President Jonathan will remember, my suggestion is that we need to target certain areas. What do you want to remedy when you are making a law? For example, we have been witnessing a flood of defections now across the entire country. These defections cannot happen in Ghana. They can't happen in Ghana. You know why? Not because Ghanaians are not hungry, not because they are not angry, not because they don't feel betrayed, but because they have a law that says that if you defect, you have 42 days for a new election to be conducted, an election in which you cannot participate in. That's what the law says in Ghana. You know, many of us think, sometimes people think that all we are looking for in a democracy, we are looking for good men to govern us. Absolute nonsense. I tell people, if I went to my parish, if I say, go to your wife now, and I said, Madam, you know, this is your husband, Kai, a wonderful human being. Okay? So it is, we are not looking for good people, we are looking for good laws to restrain even the best from trying to break those laws. So when Nigeria continues to say that, oh, we are looking for free, fair, yes, free, fair, and credible elections are possible, but there must be a condition. Secondly, in the Ghanaian system, they have amended their laws. They went through worse things than us. But right now, to be a speaker of the Ghanaian parliament, the speaker is elected is chosen by the president. And it is possible for Bishop Kukah to be, who is a Ghanaian, to become a speaker of the parliament. And once you become speaker of the parliament, you are no longer in a position to hold loyalty to your party. President Jonathan will probably tell his own story about his own experience. I think he told it in Ghana, when the speaker defected with 5 members. And our law says that if you defect, you have to write a letter to the speaker who will announce that you have defected. Now the speaker has defected. Who is going to write a letter to whom? So these are the kind of constraints that we need to remove from our system. Finally, I wanted to make reference to something that Olisa Agbakoba wrote as his remedy for the review of our constitution. There's also something about the judiciary which I wanted to talk about, but let me, since I don't want to make people sad, let me try and end by saying and appealing to all of us. Men and women have made tremendous sacrifices to get us to where we are. And we are very lucky. This gentleman that is sitting here, we're very lucky because the world is looking for him. And very often people ask, if you have people like President Obama, why are you still having the problems you are having? Well, we are running on half tank already. It is time for us to begin to think a bit more clearly about the kind of values that can hold our society together. Finally, just a word on the Trump thing. I think all of us are confusing Trump for a sickness. It's a symptom, not a disease. Okay? Trump is a symptom of the disease that is in our country. Now, I think it's Yoruba people that say that it doesn't matter if a snake is dead, whether a woman kill him or whether Abi, the snake is dead. So whether it is Trump or whoever that has given us this jab, it is time for Nigeria to wake up. Thank you very much.